Welcome to Brainstorm 9000.
Got a brain? Your brain wants to listen to this podcast.
So open your brain.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of Brainstorm 9000. Today, in the studio, I have Ashley. You've heard Ashley before. Hi, Ashley.
Yes, hello.
So, Ashley, remember we decided to talk basically about a polite way to communicate and generally speaking about communication.
hmm
And for me, it's been a big issue. I actually have a spiritual leader. I don't know. Maybe you've heard his name. His name is Jackie Chan. Do you know who that is?
Of course, I know who Jackie Chan is.
Yes, Jackie Chan plays a very interesting, remarkable character in one of the movies. The movie is called The Forbidden Kingdom.
hmm
In this movie, a teenager from today, by some weird mistake, winds up in the Middle Ages, where Jackie Chan's character is an Wushu master, basically a martial arts master.
Okay.
And they have this type of a conversation.
There's a guy in Virtua Fighter 2 who does the Buddha palm technique. Thanks, Luke. And he does the iron elbow. And he does the one finger death touch.
You know, he's talking about different.
Exactly.
Right.
How can you fill your cup if already full? How can you learn Kung Fu? You already know so much. No shadow cake, put the palm. Empty your cup.
Empty your cup. So
What
what
does it
happened was that
mean?
while this teenager was talking to Jackie Chan was pouring hot tea into his cup, and then it started pouring over and burning his hands. So he said that it's burning, and Jackie Chan said, of course, because your cup is full.
hmm
So in order for you to learn something, you need to empty your cup. You need to be open.
Of course.
So very frequently, one of the situations that I face in my office is when one of the clients comes in and basically starts telling me what they need
I see.
because they did what they call in quotes research on the internet. They basically Googled a lot of stuff, right? And it basically, if I left it the way it's presented to me, it would leave me absolutely no room
hmm
to talk to them about anything and, pardon me, to teach them, to
Yeah.
share my kind of wisdom, because I've been around for a long time and have been doing it for a long time. So it's not offensive what they do, but it works against them, because pretty much like this teenager who started communication with the grandmaster by telling him what he needs to teach him, right? It's kind of naive, like someone who studied martial arts for a while and spent basically a lifetime studying Oriental philosophy and yoga. I can tell you that legend and the legend again and again tries to teach people who enter the study of this kind of stuff that if they think they know something, then it's impossible to teach them anything, right? In medicine, things like that happen very frequently, and sometimes they take amazingly abusive situations.
And how so?
Well, we don't have to go too far. Actually, today,
hmm
at the end of my day, we are recording this episode for the minds of the internet.
Yes.
I have to tell you that. After 9 p.m., because, initially we record and then it gets edited and again it gets released usually the next week or sometimes a few weeks down the road if we have a lot of episodes recorded. A person came who hasn't been to this office for almost a year, requesting for me to prescribe a sleeping pill. And I said, look, you haven't been here for a year. I hear what you're asking me, but we need to have a conversation and I need to hear what's going on. and
Mhm.
then offer you my opinion, and then we can make a decision together what needs to happen. Didn't like
Yeah.
it, didn't like it. So things like that happen very frequently. And sometimes the interaction between people at the office here and sometimes or frequently interactions that I observe in public transportation, between people on the
Mhm.
street, is extremely impolite and frequently becomes abusive.
Indeed, it is.
So we live in 2019 in the United States of A, and I constantly hear from everybody, and you probably hear the same thing, that the millennials and the new generation is losing an art of communication, correct?
Sure.
That people don't talk to each other, they text to each other instead, right?
That is what they say.
Is it accurate?
I'm not sure it's accurate. Yeah, I guess so. I don't like to talk on the phone, so yeah,
So
I
you text,
suppose.
right?
Yeah, I text.
Do you prefer email to texting or do you prefer texting to email?
I prefer texting to email. It's faster.
Faster.
Mm-hmm.
But it's still kind of not personal, right?
Of course not.
So I can tell you that when I was in psychiatric training, and in psychiatric training we also studied psychology, they taught us again and again that it's very easy when you send somebody an email to be called abusive, right?
Oh, it's so true.
Disrespectful, because you don't see a facial expression and you
It's
are
so
not
hard.
right.
Yeah, it takes me a while to write emails because I'm afraid of how the tone sounds, and I
Right.
overthink it, probably.
Right. So I suggested, and you agreed, that today, after heavy duty episodes on artificial intelligence and superintelligence, which are kind of non-human, at least at this point, right? And
Mhm.
will never be, because it's going to be AI.
Yeah,
Maybe we can talk about human interactions.
of course.
A very close friend of mine has been studying Oriental philosophy and Chinese martial arts for many, many years. He's a super expert. And as a joke, when we call each other, I tell him, or the greatest and the strongest and the wisest people of the world.
Mhm.
It's so nice to hear your wise opinions and your soothing voice. And he
Beautiful.
responds, oh, the wisest of the people, it's so nice to hear what I totally don't deserve.
That's
Right?
precious.
So it's, I mean, it's a joke, but it's a very polite exchange. I asked you before we started recording to read
Mhm.
for us a piece from Wikipedia.
Yes.
Maybe you can,
Yeah.
you can read it.
So I'm defining an honorific. And an honorific is a title that conveys esteem, courtesy, or respect for position or rank when used in addressing or referring to a person. Sometimes the term honorific is used in a more specific sense to refer to an honorary academic title. It also often it is often also often conflated with systems of honorific speech and linguistics, which are grammatical or morphological ways of encoding the relative social status of speakers. Typically, honorifics are used as a style in the grammatical third person and as a form of address in the second person. Use in the first person by honored dignitary is uncommon or considered very rude and egotistical. Some persons forms expressions such as your most humble servant or this unworthy person, whose effect is to enhance the relative honor accorded to the person addressed.
So, for example, you can call a judge your honor, right?
Mhm.
Or I get called Dr.
Yeah, I was
Charles.
about to ask about that because, yeah.
Okay. Or it could have sometimes a negative connotation.
Mhm.
Like for example, my friend says that he is undeserving. He doesn't deserve to be called. So this way he pays an additional respect to me. I mean, we always do it in a joking way, and then we start talking like two normal people.
Mhm.
All right. So can you imagine people having arguments if, for example, somebody comes to the counter in the supermarket and during the process of checking them out,
Mhm.
the person who is standing in the counter tells them, "Oh, the greatest of the customers of this place, let me respectfully point out to you that you are trying to hide in one of your beautiful pockets on your body
Mhm.
uh, a, a can with
A banana.
beans or a banana. Would you be so kind to take it out?" And then
Mhm.
in response, the person will say, "Oh, the wisest people who is able to see through clothing. I appreciate so much your wise and respectful statement. And of
Mhm.
course, I made a terrible mistake and I apologize profusely." I mean, can you imagine that it happens
I
now?
wish.
Well, actually,
Never.
yeah.
Mhm.
So it brings me to open our conversation about how frequently, unbeknown to the majority of our audience, probably, doctors who provide care and nurse practitioners and physician assistants and nurses actually get abused.
Mhm.
Have you ever given it a thought that this might possibly
No.
happen? So you, when you had to be at the front desk in our
Mhm.
office and respond to different calls and talk to different people, never felt abused?
I felt abused, but I didn't know that the doctors in the office were being abused.
So why don't we talk about your experiences?
Uh,
What is one of the examples or the greatest of people who can remember amazing things about the world? What comes to your beautiful, thoughtful mind?
we did have one patient
Right.
who unfortunately did not get what they wanted and therefore called us some names.
Right. On the phone
Yes, on the phone.
or by texting.
By texting as well. It happens all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I honestly feel like the clients do not respect us
right.
because we're not doctors and we don't have this honorary title.
Right.
And so they think that they don't have to respect us.
Do you find it normal? Like this is the way most of the people relate to you every single day?
I think so. But
Really?
yes, only because we don't have that title. I don't think that they would speak to the doctors. Yeah, I
Right.
don't think that they would speak to the doctors the same way that they speak to us. And I know that they don't. I
You'd
know that they don't.
you'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that I had numerous occasions in which I've heard people who worked in different, let's call it in big quotes, front desk positions, because it doesn't
Mhm.
necessarily have to be the front desk. It's basically a person who responds first to somebody in need
Mhm.
when the process actually is not that accurate. I can go as far as to tell you that I had more than one chance to talk to public defenders.
Mhm.
Do you know who public defenders are? Like what their job is? Do you have
To
an idea?
defend the public or defend like the common people.
Right, let's say it again.
To defend the public or defend the common people. So like
Right.
regular everyday people.
Well, it's more dramatic than that.
I know.
So every person who is in trouble, arrested, in jail, right, gets to be represented by a professional attorney.
Yeah.
If they can't afford it, then government, either local government or in some cases federal government, provides them with what is called a public defender. It's a defender that is paid by this particular entity,
Mhm.
but is hired specifically to represent the person in question. So their client, although they are paid, let's say, by the state of New York,
Mhm.
they represent an inmate, right? Or they represent a person who goes to court. And you know what they tell me? That the most difficult part of their job is to establish a productive, respectful relationship with the client.
Hmm.
Because very frequently clients feel that this person works on the side of the government
Oh, of course,
and
yes.
is there to make their life more difficult and
Mhm.
curse at them. And then by the end, when the relationship is established,
Mhm.
the case is closed and they get a new customer. And here it goes again and again and again and again. So
Yeah.
the burnout rate of these people is extremely high.
Mhm.
Do you think nurses get abused by patients?
Of course, but not as much as the others in
Non-medical,
the office. Yes,
non-medical personnel,
exactly.
right? So I can tell you that they do get abused quite a bit, and of course, it depends on their specialty and in what environment they work. For
Mhm.
example, on a psychiatric inpatient unit where there are a number of agitated psychotic people,
Mhm.
this happens, you would think, more frequently.
Yeah.
But actually, even in outpatient clinics and even in a private office like this one,
Mhm.
still, at least verbally, people allow themselves to talk very, let's put it, very freely. And when it comes to their needs not being met, for example, if somebody comes and wants a controlled substance,
Yeah.
wants certain things to be done that this particular doctor doesn't do,
Mhm.
all the hell breaks
Okay,
loose.
but here's the difference. So
Right.
they'll take a no from you guys, but they won't take a no from us.
Well, they don't take a no from us also, but certainly it happens more frequently with you.
Yeah.
Right, we agree on that, right?
Mhm.
And then we all know, I mean, all, you, myself, and I, all of
Yes.
us, right? We know what happens with reviews sometimes,
Of course.
right? It's also not necessarily accurate, to
Mhm.
put it in a very mild way.
Yeah.
And frequently, we don't have a way to respond.
Mhm.
Because, for example,
True.
even in outlets like Google or Yelp, where we could have responded
Mhm.
because we are not restaurant owners, right?
Yeah.
We work in the medical field and have to respect the privacy of the client. For example, I choose not to respond.
Mhm. Which I think is the smartest route.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you think doctors and nurses get physically abused sometimes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Just not often. I don't believe it's common, but I could be wrong.
I don't know how common or uncommon it is in the emergency room,
Mhm.
especially in the emergency room where people see a lot of clients who are intoxicated.
Exactly, yeah.
That
Definitely true.
yeah, that I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that in psychiatry, at least, it happens.
Mhm.
Uh, I had only a few situations, but the first one I remember, and it was kind of like a funny one. I was working in the outpatient department of Bethesda Medical Center and
Mhm.
was supervised by a very prominent psychiatrist. I mean, I was working independently, I would just report to him.
Mhm.
And it was a part of the outpatient clinic where we would take walk-ins, meaning people who just come from the street and
Mhm.
they feel that they would like to see a psychiatrist. So they wait online a little bit, get registered, and then they're seen by a psychiatrist. So
Yeah.
a very petite woman who was high on crack
Mhm.
and also had, as it turned out, history of schizophrenia and was actively hallucinating, was sitting across a pretty big desk from me, and I had a guard in the room,
Mhm.
and like in the middle of our interview, suddenly she leaned across the desk, slapped me across the face, and ran away. And ran away. And I asked the guard to bring her back so I can
Oh my gosh.
continue the interview. And he was extremely surprised. Actually, he couldn't understand why I didn't get upset. Right? Why did I want him to run after her and bring her back? But you know, why are you laughing?
I'm just picturing it. It's funny.
Yeah, it was very, very unexpected, right?
Oh.
So, but you can understand my motives, right?
Yeah.
First of all, she never met me before, so it wasn't directed towards me.
Mhm. It wasn't
She was
personal.
hallucinating some kind of stuff that I wouldn't even know what it was.
Mhm.
And the other thing that since she came although she was high. She apparently needed help because she was actively hallucinating.
Mm-hmm.
Another case that comes to my mind, is it interesting?
It is, and I mean, it shows your compassion. You were able to
Well, but it's not about me.
yeah. I mean, but still,
But physicians have to be like that. But it's not. I'm not bringing it up as a point of compassion. So
okay.
another case that I remember, which I find very funny, was no physical interaction involved, just funny case. I was walking on the street from one part of the hospital to the other after a night call. So it was about 7 a.m., 7:30. And I'm walking, it was summertime, and I'm walking by two people, kind of apparently either homeless or semi-homeless, like, not very nicely dressed and stuff, waking up on one of the benches, and one of them looks at me, points a finger and says, "Psychiatrist, right?" And I
He
say,
pegged ya.
"Yes." And then I'm walking and thinking to myself, like,
How did he
how
know?
crazy should I look
Yes.
for a person to decide that I'm a psychiatrist? And then somewhere in the middle of the morning rounds, all of a sudden I recall that I actually threw him out of the emergency room earlier the night before because he was drunk.
Oh no.
So things like that happen very frequently. But one of the reasons that I'm starting this conversation is because you and our listeners might want to hear a little bit about how human interactions very frequently happen. So if there's anything you would like to ask me, we can talk more about it.
Of course. So I have a question about your accent, because on like every podcast you mention your Russian accent. Do you feel that your accent has affected the way that patients interact with you?
You know what? To my surprise, not as much. And if it does, probably sometimes in a positive way. But I had my doubts. Well, we need to remember we are in New York City. Very few people, unfortunately, don't have an accent.
Yeah.
But I have a pretty typical, it could be softer, it could be not as soft as I think it is, but still definitely a Russian accent. And if sometimes people ask me whether I'm an Israeli, I usually jokingly tell them it's a compliment because at least they don't hear a Russian accent.
Aww.
But very few. I've had cases when people couldn't understand me in the beginning of our conversation. Actually, mostly not with patients. So I was very concerned when I started my training at Beth Israel, and I was trained in many different things, including brief adaptive psychotherapy. It's very intense. And I had a very wise, older, seasoned psychotherapist. And one of the things I told him that, I don't know whether I'll be successful because I have an accent. And he says, actually, first of all, it's kind of cute. And I jokingly said, of course, it would have been much better if it was French. So now I have a double accent, right? Or it would be extremely nice if it was British because it makes people sound smart. But he said, no, it's something from Europe. It makes you very special. And for as long as you are aware, meaning myself, you can use it to your advantage. So I try to use it to my advantage. I joke about it sometimes, but most of the time, just don't bring it up.
Yeah.
Does it affect you negatively, my accent?
Not at all.
Would be nice to hear from the minds of the internet how they feel about it.
How do you feel about Dr. Schultz's accent?
Yes.
Yeah, so we discussed false reviews and ratings.
Right.
How do you feel it will affect us in the future, and how do you feel it's already affected us?
We spoke, I think, a couple of episodes ago about an episode from Black Mirror.
We did. Would you like me to tell you about this episode?
Yes.
I have a little brief rundown.
Okay.
So the episode is called Nosedive, and it's the first episode of the 3rd season of Black Mirror. And the premise of the episode is that people are able to rate one another for every interaction they have, which can impact things such as their socioeconomic status. And a young woman, Lacey, becomes desperate to improve her rating, which leads to her demise.
Right. That's a very brief description, but what happens for people, spoiler alert, right? For people who are going to see it first time, like I did, Uh, so in this future,
Mm-hmm.
any interaction ends with people pointing phones at each other and clicking on the rating, which is a five-star rating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this person has 4.2, which is kind of okay. As it turns out, as the episode develops, she could have gotten better seats on the airplane if she, and a lot of privileges if she were to stay at 4.2. But her dream is to have a new apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody's super nice, by the way. And so she goes to see an apartment, and there, in order to be accepted, her rating has to be 4.5.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes out of her way, without describing too many details, to get this rating, and in the process actually gets lower and lower ratings due to different accidents and loses her status.
Mm-hmm.
So as I said before, we already do it. I mean, people write reviews about me. For example, on ZocDoc, a popular thing, I have over 200 reviews, and my score is 4.5,
Mm-hmm.
which I understand is good. I could
It
have
is
got
good.
the apartment, right?
Yes.
But also, if it's 5.0, it's kind of weird because
Mhm.
it looks
Oh,
fake,
so
right?
true.
Right. And if it's like 1.2 or 3.0, people also
Yes.
have questions. But I can tell you that I know a couple of physicians
Mm-hmm.
whose scores on things which are not ZocDoc
Mm-hmm.
are lower than 2.
Yeah.
And these are very, very good physicians. I know them personally. I know how they work.
Mm-hmm.
But they probably have a tendency to say no to a lot of people who come and want something that should not be provided.
Mm-hmm.
And here I would like to remind our listeners about one of the principles of philosophy that is my favorite principle. It's a principle of autonomy. Do you understand it?
Autonomy, yeah.
Right. So how do you understand it?
It is being able to be oneself and
Right.
like,
Yes.
yeah.
Exactly.
Basically.
You said it very nicely. So to open it up for our brains of the internet and whoever else listens to us, essentially it tells us that for as long as a person doesn't hurt other people,
Mm-hmm.
they have a right to do whatever the hell they want.
And I
pretty
agree
much.
with that.
Right.
Yeah.
In the client provider interaction, this principle applies to both, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody, let's say a patient, has a right to come and ask questions and refuse certain types of treatment and agree to certain types of treatment, provided they have a capacity, meaning they're together.
Mm-hmm.
But also a provider has a right to do only what they feel comfortable with.
True.
So if somebody comes in and says, give me 90 pills of Xanax, depending on what the situation is, I might refuse.
Mm-hmm.
And very frequently it pisses people off.
Of course.
So in my case, because I don't see people with addiction problems at all, it's my choice. Not that I'm against them, not that I don't want to help them. I'm just not set up to do it at this office.
Mm-hmm.
It happens very infrequently, only by mistake, when people just, do doctor shopping and they decide that it's going to work here, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't. But I've known doctors but this system does exist, like it or not. I take Uber, I take Lyft, and we
Mm-hmm.
rate each other,
Yes.
right?
And do you think it would be much more fair if you were able to rate patients back?
Well, I
Write
don't know,
reviews back?
but I was actually surprised to discover that on Uber,
Mm-hmm.
not only the driver has a rating, I have a rating.
Yes.
My score is 4.85.
I think mine is somewhere similar.
Yeah. So if my score was 3, does it mean they wouldn't pick me up?
Maybe. I'm not
Well,
sure.
Yeah,
I think so, though. I think they have the choice whether or not to pick you up based off of your rating.
they do.
Yeah.
Right. See? Or, for example, we go to a restaurant, we give tips.
Mm-hmm.
So, sorry, people who work at the restaurant and live off of tips. And, my first job in the United States was cleaning dishes at the restaurant. So I'm very
Mm-hmm.
sympathetic. But I have to tell you, like, why on earth anybody would even dare to ask me for a 25% tip? And these are options that are being offered to us again and again and again.
Yeah.
So, for example, in my case, when I give a credit card, Like I'm kind of afraid not to tip well because I don't know what's going to happen.
True.
So the rating system, at least one-way rating system, does exist for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Would it be nice if I could rate patients? I don't know the answer actually because
Mm-hmm.
I see people in distress. So on one hand, if you start rating one person, you ought to rate everybody else. But how can I rate somebody who comes to me uh, uh, with an emotional problem
Yeah.
and they are actually not in control of what's going on through their mind? Should I rate them, or should we decide that we don't rate schizophrenics, but we rate people with anxiety disorders?
Mm-hmm.
You understand?
Those are all good questions.
It
Yeah.
becomes very difficult. It would be nice if I could talk back,
Mm-hmm.
right? That would be a totally different story. We had a situation, for example, at our office. You are probably aware of it. When a person came here, so one of the nicest people we have in our practice,
Mm-hmm.
who actually does have an honest rating of 5.0, it's not made up. So a super
Yes.
nice person. And then the rating went, which she fought successfully with Zagdag, saying that it's a disgusting, dirty office, which it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And that this person was sitting on an old folding chair, which is not the case. We have
Mm-hmm.
beautiful chairs.
It is very beautiful.
And it went on and on and on. So on
Yeah.
our first and second call to Zagdag, people actually, when I told people it's not true, they said, but a person has a right to express their perception. So I said, take a look at the pictures of our office you took yourself and tell me what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was silence, and then the person looked, and then the person said, yes, to me it looks beautiful, but it doesn't mean that to them it doesn't look beautiful. So
Mm-hmm.
but basically you feel like you are hitting
It's
the
so
wall.
unfair.
Yeah, and you
Yeah.
cannot say. So it's a complicated question, but I don't know the answer.
But would you do it
In
if
some
it were
cases,
allowed?
it really depends on the situation. If we
Mm-hmm.
could develop a system in which I'm prohibited from rating people in distress, but I don't know how it can be done.
I don't
So
know
at
either.
this point, I choose not to talk back
Okay. That's fair enough.
because, okay. So what else is on your extensive list of questions?
I'm curious about how you define abuse.
Well, abuse is when another person approaches me in a disrespectful, violent way, either
Mhm.
verbally or physically. I personally think that it's uncalled for.
Mhm.
But because you and me live in the environment of circa 2019,
Yes.
I'm going to Google right now
The definition of abuse.
the definition of abuse.
Okay.
Fair?
Fair enough.
Okay. So we are entering abuse. It says abuse is the improper usage or treatment of a thing, often to unfairly or improperly gain benefit. Abuse can come in many forms, such as physical or verbal maltreatment, injury, assault, violation, rape, unjust practices,
Mhm.
crimes, or other types of aggression. To these descriptions, one can also add the Kantian, like Kant was a philosopher, notion
Mhm.
of the wrongness of using another human being as means to an end rather than as ends in themselves. Meaning to use people, like when
Yeah.
you use a person, you abuse them.
Of course.
Some sources describe abuse as socially constructed, which means there may be more or less recognition of the suffering of a victim at different times and societies.
Indeed, which is
Like, for example, slavery is
yes.
a very obvious example. Was
Mhm.
considered, believe it or not, was considered to be normal at some point.
Exactly. I
So,
feel like it's very ambiguous and people can make of it what they will. I feel like even some patients would consider us telling them no abuse.
really,
Yes. I've had patients tell us that it's abusive.
well, but in this time and age in the United States, at least in large cities,
Mhm.
you can't say anything. So that's
Yeah.
another thing, that the people are so touchy that you can't even say what's on your mind. So we are
Mhm.
basically walking on eggshells all the time, and can't say anything. Which in psychotherapy, actually, I hope does
Yeah.
not happen.
You're not wrong, unfortunately.
Right.
So what do you want people to take away from this podcast?
Well, I would like people to take away from this podcast a couple of things. And
Mhm.
one of them, the main one, is that I would prefer to communicate with people whose cup is at least half empty.
Okay.
Not half full, but half empty. And it doesn't necessarily apply to the medical office environment. I
Mhm.
think that actually it's more important in our social interactions, especially this day and age, where very frequently there couldn't be a respectful, reasonable exchange of ideas,
Mhm.
because a lot of people, especially, and I understand I'm almost 64 and I talk like an old man,
Stop.
but I find that in the younger population, especially, you have to be of the same opinion about anything. I'll give you a very simple example. People come to me and tell me, Dr. Schultz, I went to see blah,
Yeah.
and they suggested that instead of medication, I take CBD oil.
Mhm.
What is your opinion about it? And then I tell them, look, it's a very poorly researched area. There are no sufficient, there's not sufficient number of well-designed controlled studies on that.
Mhm.
And then we don't know long-term consequences.
Yeah.
But they want me to say what they came for,
Oh,
right?
of course.
Right. So this is kind of crazy, because I'm not talking about myself. Somebody
Yeah.
in my position spends years and years and years of thinking about this kind of stuff, reading about it, following
Mhm.
what's going on, working with people. So, for example, if somebody on the street tells you, take an aspirin, how do they know that you need aspirin?
Yeah.
It to tell somebody take an aspirin requires significantly more than just somebody telling you I'm in pain, because you need to find out whether or not they have any stomach problems.
Mhm.
Because aspirin can cause ulcers, actually, if you take it too frequently. I don't want to scare people away,
Yeah,
but
of course.
there are many different things. Or take a Tylenol, but how do you know? Oh, he has fever,
Mhm.
but why don't we try to find out what's going on with fever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So if somebody doesn't know by now, and it's the first time they are listening to our podcast, and they cannot recognize my accent, I'm from Russia. So I immigrated from the Soviet Union. And it was very popular there when somebody came to doctors with this kind of stuff, which
Mhm.
people did do. We would frequently tell them, so have you ever had your TV break? And they would say yes. It happened very frequently. And when somebody comes to repair it, do you tell them what to do? And the answer would be, of course not. I don't know what TV is. So then the doctor will tell them, but how come you have an opinion about what medication we have to give you? This is kind of extreme, this conversation.
Mhm.
I don't know that I ever had it myself with anybody, and I don't support this kind of interaction. But when it happens, it makes me wonder what my function is. So I actually ask people, what is my function, when they start talking to me like that.
Yeah.
And then I tell them jokingly about my spiritual leader, whose name is Jackie Chan. Tell them about, seriously, tell them about the movie. Tell them that this is my favorite Chinese proverb. And I interpret it like this: if your cup is full, it has no room for more water.
So do you think that patients shouldn't be doing their own research?
Not patients. When there is human interaction, we have to be open to different
Oh, of
types
course,
of
in
opinion.
general.
What we call research is not research, it's inquiry. So they go online
Okay.
and they see what a bunch of people
That's
say.
actually a good point.
Right. Because research means that things are done under controlled
Mhm.
circumstances, in controlled environment.
Good point.
And if you read even one very well-designed controlled study, you could find another one which talks about exactly
The opposite.
the opposite,
Yeah.
right? So it takes years and years of education and developing an ability to to see what works and what doesn't work. And then somebody like myself sits in the office all day and prescribes medication, not to conduct experiments, but then people come back and I see what's going on. So it's not like I have to tell them and they have to do everything I tell them, but there has to be at least room for an exchange of ideas.
I agree with you.
Yeah. The same is true about anything that happens. Like, for example, here, try pizza. And then the answer is, I don't want to, right?
Yeah.
You don't like pizza?
Who doesn't like pizza?
Yeah. Well, I actually had a classmate in the 3rd grade who didn't like ice cream.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible. How can you imagine that somebody doesn't like ice cream?
Ice cream is okay.
But you know what I mean. People.
Yes.
So my desire to start this conversation was just to invite people to kind of like sit back and think about how much better would it be if we were polite with each other, respectful with each other. And actually, I can tell you that I taught my students all my life and my children that while you can have an argument of any kind at any level with a person who is equal to you, socially and educationally, you should not talk down to people who cannot answer to you because, right? And who are not as educated as you are. Education, degrees, is something that is built on top of a person. I meet people again and again and again, and met them all my life, who are extremely smart, extremely intelligent, and not educated at all. And I met a bunch of educated idiots, and I meet them every day, right? So your ethnic, social background, your educational level mean very little. Your human qualities, compassion, capacity to love people, mean a lot. Do you agree?
I agree 1,000%.
So on this positive note, maybe I can dare to say, keep your brains wide open. Let's say it together.
Keep your brains wide open.
Yeah. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Brainstorm 9000. If you like us, love us, or marginally tolerate us,
And definitely, if you hate us,
then go on social media and give us a review on Stitcher, iTunes, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to us.
and remember, keep your brains open.